friends, warm welcome to everybody. I'm Dr. David Litwa, and today I'm going to be taking you through the second chapter of my book, Posthuman Transformation, in Ancient Mediterranean Thought. For those of you who want to catch the intro and chapter 1, please check out the earlier episodes. I'm offering this book at a special deal to patrons, but I only have 3 copies of it left. I can send it to you signed in the mail, so just send me a note through the Patreon message function, and we will set up a deal if there's still stock available. All right, let's begin. Chapter 2 is about Empedocles as a daemon, and I define daemon in the introduction to this series. A daemon is essentially a divine or spirit being mediating between the high deity or a high deity and human beings. So in that respect, it's like an angel. And the ancient Greeks did not consider daemons to be all bad. They could be mischievous or trickster figures. Some of them might be bad, but a lot of them were not necessarily bad. And especially when you talk among philosophers, as we'll see with Plato especially, daemons as divine beings can only be good. And so when Empedocles proclaims himself as a daemon, and this is his great unique feature, that he is a self-daemonifier, he is proclaiming the truth of human existence at the highest phase of its evolutionary development. Now, in my opinion, everybody should know at least a little bit about Empedocles. He is entirely a Western figure from South Sicily in the ancient town of Acragos, modern Agrigento. He is, or was, a spiritual master and a poet. And in his lifetime, he also had a reputation as a political reformer. Some people thought that he was exiled from Acragos because he wanted to bring about a democratic revolution, and he was forced out. It's difficult to verify those details. Certainly, Empedocles felt himself as an exile from heaven. Likely, Empedocles was a Pythagorean, but a Pythagorean of his own sort, of his own making, as it were. He seems to have lauded Pythagoras as one who knew his previous existences and strove himself to attain memory of those previous lives. It's somewhat disputed whether he wrote 1 or 2 poems, but the general position is that the fragments that we have from Empedocles' work, which can be found in any collection of pre-Socratic writings, are from 2 poems, one called On Nature or Periphasios, and the other called Purifications or Katharme. And it's this idea of purification that struck me as I was writing the book. In sum, Empedocles was a metaphysician, and interestingly, in his time, you would do metaphysics not through writing dry and dusty treatises, but by writing poetry. And some of his poetry, which is written in a kind of Homeric vein, the Homeric hexameters, is very beautiful. And in my chapter, I try to give some of the poetic flavor of Empedocles by having the lines rhyme. So that's my contribution, I guess, to the translation of Empedocles. Empedocles also had the reputation as a healer. He could heal by his word alone. And he reportedly, as he himself said, could control the winds. And also, he was credited with raising up a woman who had not breathed for a very long time. And this control of the wind, that is external air and internal air, are seemingly related. He can bring the winds or stop the winds and also create the winds within the human body as they pump through the lungs. Let's take a brief look at Empedocles' metaphysics. This is obviously difficult to reconstruct because the poems of Empedocles don't survive and all we have are fragments, but there's a fair many fragments, or many that have survived as quotations from later writers. So all of this is a reconstruction, and it gets quite complex if you're interested in this kind of stuff. Basically, Empedocles theorized that there were 4 simple and eternal elements, which are long-lasting and do not perish. These are earth, air, fire, and water. And in addition to these, there are 2 energies, which he called love, or philia, and strife, nikos. And these 2 energies are the energies which unite and join, bring together the 4 elements. That is the energy of love. And the energy of strife does the opposite. It brings chaos and disorder and disorganization. And these 2 elements, like yin and yang, are in eternal competition. And in some phases of the universe, the rule of love dominates, and we head toward unity. And the ultimate unity is the unity of the sphere, when all reality is united in a perfect, neat combination of earth, air, fire, and water. And that is the kind of paradisial state of matter. And the opposite of that, the apocalypse, is when all of matter breaks apart and separates and is very far apart and unable to unite. So in that respect, it's sort of like in modern physics, where the universe is radically expanding, sort of out of control, and in the next billion or so years will be so far distant from anything else, and all the energies of the sun will, of the stars, will burn out, and there will be nothing but a desolate blackness. That is similar to the Empedoclean apocalypse. So given the nature of my book, what I focus on is Empedocles' concept of the daemon. And Empedocles considered all human beings in their core nature to be daemones, and particularly fallen daemones. But the unfallen daemones are pure, intelligent, and spherical beings. They are perfect and long-living combinations of the 4 elements organized by the energy of love. And this is important because daemones are sort of like microcosms of the universe when it is wholly united, pure, perfect, and spherical. And so there's an analogy between the microcosm of the true self and the macrocosm of the universe at the height of love's rule. At any rate, this is my theory, and I present it only as that. You who are interested in this can research this further and find lots and lots of opinions. But for now, that's my position. So Empedocles is a very fun writer, and as often as I can, I try to quote him to give you the flavor of his rich poetical discourse. In one fragment he says, quote, "There is an oracle of necessity, an ancient divine vote, everlasting sealed with a broad oath. When one by fear defiles one's limbs and heirs, and criminally the oath forswears, the demones wander thrice 10,000 seasons from the blessed." Unquote. Now I've had to, in order to fit it to the screen here, omit several sections of this poetic line, but what is being talked about essentially is the primeval fall of the demones. The idea of a fall of souls is not a Christian idea. Empedocles is, at least for 450 years before Christianity. And what he talks about is the primeval fall of the daimones. And this is interesting because it gives us access to why we are who we are and where we are, and how we return back to the primeval state. But let me continue the quote. Here again in my translation, quote, "With time they grow up into every mortal form, exchanging the paths of life forlorn. One of these demones I also am, an exile from the gods and a refugee, since I trusted in strife, who raves with insanity," unquote. Now it's not exactly clear how Empedocles trusted in strife. He himself was constrained by his poetic language. But what seems to be said here is that somehow or other, the daimonic Empedocles, along with other daimons, accepted the force and the energy of division. And their perfect bodies, their perfect spherical bodies, were broken apart. And their daimonic, whatever was left of their daimonic self, was thrown into every mortal form. And as in traditional Pythagorean thought, what this means is that the self was reincarnated in multiple plant and animal forms so that it could evolve back into its daimonic form. It is disputed what the original sins of the daimon were, and there's some difficulty in the manuscripts because when Empedocles uses the word by fear, phabo, sometimes this is amended to phano, by murder. But I don't see an overwhelming reason to keep that emendation, but you'll sometimes, actually more often, see that translated. What seems to be the case is that there are two primal sins mentioned, fear and perjury, breaking some kind of oath and living in fear. And fear is the acceptance of division and of separation and of disorder and disarray. And these are what break apart the perfect paradise of the daimonic state. And the daimones, we don't know if all fall, we don't know if some of them fall, or I should say we don't know if some daimones perdure in their long-lived state, but it seems that a lot of them do fall. And a lot of them then end up in this world which is more or less dominated by strife, where the organization of matter is not quite at the level of unity, and there is such a diversity of being, and the combination of matter appears in various life forms. And that's the state in which the daimones are said to grow and be purified. And Empedocles is quite frank on this point. He says that he's gone through any number of reincarnations into entities which we would consider quite low on the chain of being. But for Empedocles, all reality, including plant reality, has a share in consciousness. And that's why, even at the lowest level of consciousness, one can enter into the life of plants and lower animals. Or as Empedocles says, in very truth, I was a boy and a girl, a bush and a bird, and a fish in ocean's swirl. And by going through these combinations of plants and animals, which themselves are combinations, different combinations of the elements. One undergoes a system of purification. It is purification by earth, by water, by fire, and by air. And as long as when one finally evolves into the human state, as long as the human refrains from killing, either plants or animals, one can attain or evolve back into one's daimonic state. Because remember, you can't kill anything, because everything has consciousness. Everything is on some level sentient. And so that's why Empedocles very strongly reacted to the dominant mode of religion in his life, which centered around the sacrifice of animals. He thought that that was the ultimate defilement. And so it was said that the only thing he ever sacrificed was an ox made out of incense materials, which could be given up as smoke. So let's quote Empedocles again, and in this case, his most famous or most quoted lines, which opened up his poem, The Purifications, and they are my personal favorite lines. Quote, "Dear friends who inhabit the great city along Acrogos's yellow stream, rejoice, I am among you, a deathless god. I go on tour, wreathed with head ribbons and florid crowns. I am worshipped by both genders in their thousands attending." Unquote. This is quite fascinating, and it raises the question whether he means the same by God as daimon, because he viewed himself as a daimon. And for my position, you can read the book. There's some nuance here. But from this quote, lots of ancient people intuited that Empedocles was a sort of flamboyant personality. We don't really know his personality, but if he's really talking about being worshipped, this is quite an extraordinary parallel to what we find in Jesus of Nazareth as he's presented in the Gospels, and many other holy figures, divinized people in antiquity. So this is a line worth memorizing. Now, I should emphasize that my interpretation of Empedocles is in some way really influenced by the reception of Empedocles. And in the reception of Empedocles, the emphasis on moral purification, as well as simple catharsis, religious purification, is really important. And so I'm not claiming to get back to the original Empedocles. I am trying to show, in part, how Empedocles was himself put through a Platonic filter and read in a certain way in late antiquity. And a good indication of this is a quote by Sextus Empiricus, who said that the philosopher serious about the study of nature, quote, will understand that Empedocles called himself a god because he alone, having kept his mind pure and unpolluted from vice, had grasped the God without by means of the God within himself, unquote. And here, purification, meaning unpolluted from vice, is really the key for me. This is an expanded sense of purification, which accesses the moral domain, and this is something that both Platonists and Christians pick up later. And it's what allows us to compare the different systems. What Empedocles himself meant by purification really just had a lot to do with diet and not sacrificing animals. But in later interpretation, his idea of purification was moralized. And that's what I try to bring out. Now, there's a very fun death legend of Empedocles, and I'm not vouching for its historicity, but I think it tells us a lot about Empedocles' own self-identity and way of being in the world. He really lived his philosophy, and he proclaimed himself a daimon, and he proclaimed himself having superhuman powers. But at the end of his life, he disappeared, basically, and it was said that he had ended his life by hurling himself into the famous volcano on Sicily, Mount Etna, apparently in an effort to release his inner daimon through the element of fire. And probably Empedocles thought that the daimonic self, or whatever exactly it was, went to live on the moon. And so, he had a very concrete understanding of survival and where he would be surviving. But it's regardless of what you think of this particular death tradition, Empedocles really embodies philosophy put into practice. It's a way of life. It's a religion in and of itself. And it's a path of salvation and a story of not just the self, or the evolving self, but of a cosmic evolution where all of us are evolving toward higher life forms. And that's all that I will reveal in this particular teaser. For those wanting more details, check out the chapter and my notes, and you'll find there some suggestions for further reading. For now, I just want to thank everybody for coming along. I hope your interest has been piqued and that you'll continue to study this material and seriously consider purchasing the book. So for those of you who enjoyed this video, just leave a like and feel free to leave a comment. I answer all questions on the Patreon. Thank you again to everybody. All the best, and take care.